We often look at the world's most visionary individuals, the pioneers, the leaders, the historical icons, and we assume they just walked a straight, glorious line of victories. We see the impressive titles, we see the gold medals, we see their names carved into the history books, but what we don't see, what's always hidden from public view, are the invisible scars. We don't see the quiet nights of crushing defeat that forge a true, unbreakable resilience. Today, in this explainer, we are going to explore a story that acts as an absolute masterclass in the psychology of human purpose. We're going to examine how absolute, soul-crushing despair can actually be transformed into world-changing drive. We are looking at the life of A.P.J. Abdul Kalam, the man who had famously become known as the Missile Man of India. But we aren't going to start with his triumphs. We are starting in a moment of devastating, total failure. A failure that acted as the ultimate catalyst for everything that followed. Let's dive into the alchemy of purpose.
9. Just a single digit. But for a young A.P.J. Abdul Kalam, that number 9 was the exact agonizing measurement of a completely shattered dream. You see, this young man had one singular burning desire in his heart. He just wanted to become a fighter pilot. He had fought through immense, grinding poverty just to get to this interview. This was a journey funded only because his older sister made the ultimate sacrifice of pawning her own gold bangles. I mean, pause and think about that for a second. Can you even imagine the psychological weight of carrying the financial sacrifices and the silent, desperate hopes of your entire family on your shoulders? So he took the exam, he gave it absolutely everything he had. There were exactly 8 seats available for fighter pilots. 8. When the results were finally pinned to the board, his rank was 9th. He was exactly one step away from everything he had ever wanted in his entire life. A gap that is incredibly small, yet it was enough to completely unravel his lifelong dream. Standing there, staring down at the dark waters of the Ganges River, he faced a darkness that nearly consumed him whole. The thought of ending his own life, of just letting the river wash away the failure, actually crept into his mind. The pain was that deep. History doesn't remember the names of the 8 men who were selected that day, but the boy who came in 9th, the one who thought his life was over, his next steps would permanently alter the trajectory of an entire nation.
Section 1. The death of an identity. What actually happens to a person when they face a completely shattered dream?
When the one single dream you've tied your entire existence to is utterly destroyed, it leaves a devastating, echoing void inside you. The proud fighter pilot identity that Kalam had clung to for years was just gone, vaporized. But here's the profound truth. How we respond to that sudden emptiness changes literally everything about our future. The renowned organizational psychologist Adam Grant explores a brilliant concept called post-traumatic growth. We've all heard of PTSD, but post-traumatic growth is the psychological phenomenon where an individual experiences severe trauma, heartbreak, or massive failure, and instead of being permanently destroyed by it, their mind actually rewires itself. They develop a highly focused, completely upgraded version of themselves. For Kalam, this massive psychological shift came from an unexpected mentor, Swami Sivananda. This mentor noticed the deep, heavy despair in the young man and offered a perspective that changed everything. He told Kalam that perhaps he was rejected not because he was weak or incapable, but because his destiny wasn't merely to fly airplanes in the sky. His destiny was to pierce the sky itself. That single profound realization injected a new, blazing drive into the empty void of his identity death. Kalam realized that if he couldn't fly the airplanes, well, he was going to build the rockets that went higher than any airplane ever could. His rejection didn't break him, it fueled massive post-traumatic growth. The legendary Missile Man was quite literally birthed from the ashes of his greatest failure.
Which brings us to Section 2, the power of scarcity and the incredible psychological advantage of using your lack of resources as a weapon.
If you really want to understand the power of scarcity, you have to look at Kalam's childhood. In his fascinating book Stretch, author Scott Sonnenschein explains how an excess of comfort, having everything handed to you, can actually stifle natural talent. But a severe lack of resources? That can force the human brain into a highly calibrated, brilliantly creative survival mode. So I want you to imagine being a 10-year-old boy living in a tiny, cramped, one-room house with 5 other children. When the sun went down, there wasn't even enough money for kerosene to light the night lantern. Total darkness. Yet instead of surrendering to these brutal circumstances and saying life is unfair, he completely flipped the script. He desperately wanted to learn math from a highly respected teacher in town. This teacher offered free tuition, but there was a catch. Students had to arrive at 5 a.m. completely bathed and ready. So every single day at 4 a.m. in the biting, freezing cold, this young boy took ice-cold baths just for the absolute privilege of learning. And to support his struggling family, he walked miles to the railway station every morning to sell the Dinamani newspaper on the dusty streets. But he didn't just blindly sell them. He read every single word of every single newspaper he carried. He turned those noisy, dusty railway platforms into his own personal classroom. He weaponized his utter lack of resources to become an absolute sponge for knowledge.
And those brutal lessons of scarcity, they didn't stop in his childhood. They followed him right into his college days at the Madras Institute of Technology, serving as an extreme, do-or-die pressure test. He was tasked with designing a complex, low-level attack aircraft model. But during an inspection, his professor was absolutely furious to find the progress incomplete. So the professor delivered a ruthless, terrifying ultimatum to the young scholar. Now remember, Kalam relied entirely on a desperately needed scholarship to stay in school. The professor told him, "You have exactly 3 days, 72 hours, to finish this model perfectly. If you don't, your scholarship is canceled immediately." Boom, just like that. For a profoundly poor student carrying the weight of his family's pawning of gold bangles, this was the ultimate terrifying test. His entire future was suddenly hanging by a thread. But you know what? It's in these terrifying, impossible moments that the human mind reveals its true limitless capacity. When you are pushed completely against the wall, with no way out, you enter a state of absolute hyperfocus.
The fascinating psychological principle at play here is known as Parkinson's law. It states quite simply, work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. Think about it in your own life. If that furious professor had given Kalam a full month to finish the aircraft model, it would have taken exactly 1 month. The human brain is incredibly skilled at finding excuses to delay, to procrastinate, to seek comfort. But faced with just 72 hours and the complete destruction of his entire future, Kalam did not sleep. Literally. For 3 straight days and nights, he worked. He completely ignored hunger. He ignored bone-deep exhaustion. He forcefully rewired his mind to reject short-term comfort in exchange for unbreakable, ironclad discipline. When that professor returned 72 hours later to find a flawless, brilliant model sitting on the desk, he was stunned. He admitted he was just testing the young man's absolute limits. Kalam proved a vital lesson here. We don't necessarily lack time. What we often lack is a dangerous, non-negotiable deadline that forces absolute execution.
Now watch how this exact same scarcity mindset scaled up to a massive national level. It's the year 1963 in Thumba, a tiny, unassuming fishing village in Kerala. This obscure spot became the literal birthplace of India's space program. At this exact same time in history, nations like the United States were working with unfathomable billion-dollar budgets in massive, highly sanitized NASA laboratories. But Dr. Kalam and his team, they operated under an entirely different reality. Their grand headquarters? It was an old, functioning church named St. Mary Magdalene. Their high-tech design workshop was the local bishop's room. And their laboratory? I kid you not, it was a converted cowshed. They had to transport highly sensitive advanced rocket parts by strapping them to the backs of bicycles and tying them to slow-moving bullet carts. The juxtaposition between what NASA had and what Kalam's team had is almost comical, but it reveals a profound, undeniable lesson. When a team is fiercely, emotionally unified by a massive, world-changing vision, a lack of traditional resources suddenly becomes entirely irrelevant.
Let's move to Section 3, the shield of leadership and the true cost of protecting a team.
Look, succeeding in a closed-door college test while building a wooden model is one thing, but failing on a massive, global stage in front of the entire world, that is a completely different psychological nightmare. In 1979, the highly anticipated SLV-3 space project represented 10 grueling years of research, sweat, tears, and relentless development. Dr. Kalam was the primary project director. His team had spent crores of rupees, which was a massive, critical portion of a developing nation's incredibly tight budget, just to prove themselves on the global stage. On the morning of the launch, anticipation was through the roof. The rocket roared into the sky. It was a beautiful sight. But then, exactly 317 seconds after liftoff, catastrophe struck. The radar blip began to behave erratically, and then it vanished. The rocket had completely spiraled out of control, plunging directly into the deep waters of the Bay of Bengal. Just let that sink in. A full decade of sleepless nights, the precious budget of a struggling country, and the fragile pride of an entire nation, all of it gone, swallowed by the ocean in just 317 seconds. The crushing, suffocating silence in that control room marked a moment of devastating heartbreak for the entire team.
The aftermath of that crash was intensely brutal. The press was circling like sharks, aggressively questioning why a struggling, developing country was wasting millions funding space dreams that just ended up at the bottom of the ocean. Dr. Kalam, feeling the full weight of the failure, was absolutely terrified of facing the media.
But what happened next is a masterclass in human management. It perfectly embodies what leadership author Simon Sinek calls the circle of safety in his brilliant book, Leaders Eat Last. The chairman of ISRO, Professor Satish Dhawan, stepped into the room. He didn't scream, he didn't point fingers, he didn't pass the blame to Dr. Kalam or the exhausted team. Instead, Dhawan walked out and faced that hostile, angry press entirely by himself. He stood in front of the cameras and clearly stated that the mission had failed, that the fault was entirely his as the chairman, but that he had complete, unwavering faith that his team would succeed the following year. He absorbed every single bullet of criticism. He created an impenetrable psychological shield around his young team. You see, when a team realizes that their leader will step up and absorb external dangers just to keep them safe, they don't just feel relieved. They work with a level of ferocious dedication that is simply unmatched.
And the results of that immense psychological safety? They became crystal clear exactly 1 year later. On July 18, 1980, the exact same team stood in the exact same tense control room. They launched the SLV-3 again. And this time, it tore through the atmosphere flawlessly. It reached orbit. India officially made history that day. Now, with the press waiting outside, eager to finally crown the heroes, Satish Dhawan made a very different choice than he had made a year prior. When failure happened, he stood at the front. But now, in the glorious light of success, he stayed behind. He turned to Dr. Kalam and told him to go out to the press, take his team, and take absolutely all the credit. It's such a profound, beautiful demonstration of true leadership. When things go wrong, the leader steps to the front to take the blame. When things go right, the leader steps to the back to give away the glory. It clearly illustrates exactly why Dr. Kalam and his team were willing to completely push past their human limits for the WAN for the rest of their careers.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 4, Purpose Beyond Success and the Ultimate Hidden Trap of Achievement.
We all know that surviving failure is incredibly hard, but surviving monumental success, that actually presents an entirely different, often more dangerous psychological trap, the trap of extreme comfort. Once you finally get the accolades, once the money comes in, once you are famous, the hunger that got you there can very naturally begin to fade. The real, ultimate test of a person's purpose is how they behave when they are suddenly offered everything they could ever want. After his brilliance became globally undeniable, NASA came knocking. They came to Dr. Kalam with an absolutely staggering offer. We are talking virtually unlimited budgets, access to the most advanced, pristine laboratories on the planet, and a life of total luxury and guaranteed scientific success in the United States. It was the ultimate golden ticket. On the other side of the scale was India's reality, a developing nation with microscopic budgets, immense political and social pressure, and a highly uncertain future. Dr. Kalam looked at that golden ticket, and he politely declined it. Why? Because his underlying purpose wasn't about personal luxury or individual glory. His mission was to elevate his home country. He recognized that while America already had thousands of brilliant minds, his homeland desperately, urgently needed his expertise. He proved an absolute dedication to a massive mission that completely transcended any personal gain.
The brilliant author David Brooks divides human qualities into two very distinct paths, what he calls resume virtues and eulogy virtues. Resume virtues are the obvious things, the things you put on a LinkedIn profile. It's the money, the prestigious degrees, the fancy job titles, the public status. But eulogy virtues, those are the things people actually talk about when you are gone. It's your deep character, your lasting legacy, your kindness, and your absolute integrity. Dr. A.P.J. Abdul Kalam spent his entire life fiercely prioritizing his eulogy over his resume. In 2002, he was elected to become the president of the largest democracy in the world. Now picture this. When the man who single-handedly gave India its formidable space and missile program moved into the magnificent, sprawling 340-room presidential palace in New Delhi, he didn't bring fleets of luxury cars. He didn't bring a massive, demanding entourage. He walked through those grand doors arriving with just 2 small suitcases. One suitcase contained a few simple, everyday clothes, and the other? It was completely filled with his favorite books.
The anecdotes that emerged from his time in the highest office reflect a deep, almost radical level of humility. As president, he quietly, without any PR fanfare, donated his entire salary to a trust that provided basic amenities to rural, impoverished children. There's another famous story where, while visiting a prestigious university in Varanasi, the organizers had eagerly placed a massive, highly ornate VIP chair right in the center of the stage, specifically designed just for him. But when President Kalam walked out on stage, he stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at the giant throne and he flatly refused to sit in it. He politely asked that it be completely removed and replaced with a normal, common chair exactly like the ones every single student and faculty member was using. It proves a powerful psychological point. When a human being knows exactly what their larger purpose is, the desperate need for external validation, for hollow status symbols, or for cheap showmanship, it simply fades away into nothingness.
The renowned psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl once wrote something incredibly powerful. He said, "A human being does not die when their breathing stops. They die when their purpose ends." I don't think there is a quote that better captures the absolute essence of Dr. Kalam's life philosophy. You see, for a true visionary individual, purpose is not just a job. It's not something you eventually get tired of and retire from to play golf. On July 27, 2015, at 83 years old, Dr. Kalam traveled to the Indian Institute of Management in Shillong. He stood there at the front of a room packed full of young, eager students doing exactly what he loved most in this world: teaching, igniting minds, and sharing his vision for the future. And right there, mid-sentence, doing his life's great work, his heart stopped. He passed away exactly as he lived, in the relentless, unyielding pursuit of his mission. He proved to the world that a burning, magnificent purpose can propel an individual forward until their very last breath on this earth.
We spend so much of our lives wishing for better circumstances. We wish for more money, more time, a better boss, or more resources. But the epic story of the Missile Man forces us to stop and reflect on a deeply uncomfortable truth. Our struggles, our rejections, and our lack of resources might actually be the exact perfect conditions required to forge our greatest capabilities. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a highly provocative question. Look at your life right now. Are the comforts you currently enjoy secretly costing you your ultimate dreams? Are you spending all your time building your resume while completely ignoring your eulogy? Finding a consuming purpose, a mission so large that it commands your every waking thought, can permanently transform how you view your own limitations. Instead of sitting around waiting for the perfect moment or the easier path, perhaps the greatest growth you will ever experience comes from looking straight at your lack of resources, embracing the struggle, and choosing to boldly push forward anyway. Find that purpose that won't let you sleep. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep pushing forward.